I want to turn and talk about this whole impeachment effort underway in Washington. And to do that, I captioned this, impeachment is unrelated to Riot. Nancy Pelosi is trying to say that she had to launch this impeachment effort because the riots in the Capitol last Wednesday, January 6th, were directly and intentionally incited by President Trump. This is hogwash. This is hogwash. This is a lie. But I'm getting at telling you, we're going to talk about all of this in this segment. But the reason Nancy Pelosi is doing this is because she wants to have a second impeachment, under Donald Trump's name forever throughout history. The only president impeached twice. She would probably try to move the whole thing to the Senate and vote for removal. She may not have time logistically, but this is Nancy Pelosi, a pure 100% political stunt. This impeachment effort is a political stunt. It is, she's jumping on the fact that there were riots last Wednesday, January 6th, and they were bad. I mean, people smashed windows. They broke things inside the Capitol. Someone walked around with her lectern, I think, with her laptop. Terrible behavior. Everybody who engaged in that should be, if they can figure out who they are, arrested and prosecuted. Everybody, especially people smashing windows, breaking things, and there have been people arrested. But I'm saying to you, and I mean it, it is a stunt to engage in impeachment because Nancy Pelosi knows just as well as pretty much everyone in Washington knows that that violent behavior at the Capitol was in large part instigated and fomented by the radical left Antifa organization and other similar anti-American, fascist, communistic organizations. Those people got things stirred up. I am not saying there weren't any Trump people involved. There probably were. In fact, I know there were Trump supporters who since been arrested. I say anyone who committed crimes, broke windows, smashed things, did all the kind of violence and destruction that is unacceptable, all of them should be prosecuted. But Nancy Pelosi knows as well as everyone else in America that the riot was largely pushed by the left, by the mob, not by President Trump. President Trump was not responsible for it, should not be held responsible for it. She knows this, but she sees it as an opportunity to further harm not just Trump, but to further demoralize Trump's supporters. So this is what she's really doing. But now I want to go back to and talk about what President Trump said at the close of the rally. So he spoke last January 6th in Washington, and it was obviously recorded. I want to ask Matthew Wonderful to play a short segment from the Trump rally, what Trump said, what he actually said about heading over to the Capitol. So we have that clip, I think. Matthew
All
Wonderful.
of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing, and stolen by the fake news media. That's what they've done and what they're doing. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore. And that's what this is all about. And to use a favorite term that all of you people really came up with, we will stop the steal. We have come to demand that Congress do the right thing and only count the electors who have been lawfully slated. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Today we will see whether Republicans stand strong for integrity of our elections, but whether or not they stand strong for our country. Our country. Our country has been under siege for a long time.
I got to tell you, folks, that's what he said, peacefully. And I want to just place the context for you. I am not excusing anyone who committed violence, smashed windows, stole things, destroyed property. I'm not defending any of them. But back on, as I said, I'm not going to say it any more times, wherever you, if you're an Antifa person who is obviously, there's already been eyewitness discussion. Antifa arrived on the scene. They were apparently led in by the Capitol Police. All sorts of behavior. Antifa was on the ground in Washington on this January 6th day. But let me just set the context. So January 6th was the day last week when the Congress, as required by the Constitution, receives the electoral votes that came from all the states, came from the Electoral College, and they decide whether to certify or not certify them. So if you are someone who's paid attention and you recognize how much corruption there was in this 2020 election cycle, and you're sitting there listening to Trump, you're there because you're hoping to put pressure on Congress, to do the right thing, to refuse to certify fraudulent electors, to send this question back to the states of who the fraudulent in fact, there were over 100 legislators that asked, over 100 state legislators asked Congress, please send this back to us. We want to try to fix it. The 6 states, especially in question, all of them had reasons that at the time they certified the election, they didn't know enough or they didn't know anything about the fraud, but by this point they do. So there was great hope that Vice President Pence would send back the electors to some of those states, or that Congress would refuse to certify them. And literally, people, I want you to put yourself in the mindset, because this is still where 75 million or so Americans are, the ones who voted for Trump. They know the election was stolen, and this is their last, as they know of, last legal stand, the way they can take a stand and go up to Congress and use their presence in Washington to put pressure on Congress to say, don't you dare certify a fraudulent election. That's why the people were there. They're there to support Trump and clap and cheer him on, but they're there to put pressure on Congress to say, don't you dare certify a fraudulent election. That's why they were there. And why Antifa was there and other left-wing organizations was in part to be a counter to the Trump supporters, but also they were there to infiltrate the Trump crowds, to dress like Trump supporters, so people would attribute their actions to the Trump supporters. So this was the scene on January 6th in Washington. As you know, ended in great violence. And to be really clear, the one person who was killed by gunfire was a veteran, a woman veteran who served four tours of duty, 13-year veteran, a woman, unarmed, shot by a Capitol Hill police officer. So, I mean, that violence is not at the hands of either Antifa or the Trump protesters, Trump supporters. That's at the hand of the Capitol Police. And I really hope, they say they're investigating. I hope that there is some charge brought against that person. Opening fire on an unarmed woman seems a little crazy. But back to what happened that day, it was chaotic. But the idea that Nancy Pelosi is seizing on it as an opportunity to bring about the next Trump impeachment is pure political stunt. It is. And she's not doing it because she really wants to show America how much they don't like what happened at the Capitol. She's doing it because she thinks she can further harm Trump's legacy. She can further tell the American people, if you supported Trump, he's a bad guy, and this is why they're doing it. I wanted to show you something, and I say this because you could do a lot of other things as your Nancy Pelosi. You could condemn the rioters. You could call for, and she has called for, the firing of various people who should have kept the crowds under control and didn't, and they have either resigned or been fired. She could do those things. She could call for the condemnation of the people who had who committed, broke the windows, smashed, and all that. She could demand investigation. She could say, I want a speedy investigation. I want these people brought up. You could do a lot of things to push the prosecution of the wrongdoers. There's absolutely no reason for her to be pushing impeachment as a result of the riots. And by the way, I can tell you, there was a polling, even in a liberal pollster, this is Harris and Hill, the Hill-Harris poll, so it's liberals doing the polling. Even they found the majority of Americans blame the violence at the Capitol on the mob, not on Trump. And who incited? Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. Yeah, that's it. They want to blame, this is the Hill-Harris poll that say, these are leftists doing this poll, and 55% they blame mostly the mob, and 45% say it was incited by Trump. And I got to tell you, if you continue seeing all these headlines, the left has had a field day trying to blame Trump. I'm just saying it's wrong to blame Trump for what happened. He said peacefully, and yes, he's wound up, as are millions of Americans, because they're watching the election stolen, and it's finally dawning on them, nobody is going to stand up for them. This is part of what is so why there continues to be the level of outrage and frustration, and it's not going to go away among Trump voters, is because they realize the state legislatures won't stand up for them, the state courts won't stand up for them, the federal courts won't stand up for them, the Supreme Court won't stand up for them, the FBI, the DOJ will not investigate, will not look into it, the Supreme Court won't look into it, and now Congress. What the American voters being told is nobody cares. No one with any power or authority in this country cares that the election was stolen. No one cares that Trump won and Biden lost, but what we're going to have to accept for 4 years is that Biden becomes president. This is why there's so much anger. So Pelosi, grotesquely out of line to be turning this into a political stunt, but you know, she is doing that. She's actually down this path of talking about whether or not the House, that has a very slim Democrat majority, should be able to expel GOP House members who would not go along with the fraudulent Electoral College votes. And just by way of contrast, in the state of Wisconsin, if you think these things don't happen other places, state of Wisconsin, there's a picture I sent Matt the Wonderful back in 2011 when there was I don't even know what the issue was. I don't remember what the issue was. Look at these people. This is a protest inside Wisconsin. That top right picture and bottom right and bottom left. There were 100,000 people who occupied the Wisconsin Capitol. And I say that not because I think that it's a great idea, but that this is the kind of thing people do when they are trying to make a point to their legislators. They are trying to make a point to get inside the Capitol to say, we are here to protest. A similar one, similar to Wisconsin. So back in when we had and I refuse to call it the Women's March, it's the I Hate America March by people who happen to be women. The Women I Hate America March that, we just got on Trump's case right away. But when they were in Washington marching in 2018, they were marching as part of actually the anti-Kavanaugh proceedings, when they were trying to prevent Kavanaugh from being confirmed in the Supreme Court. They actually put out on their own media, we were planning to shut down the Capitol building, but the authorities were so scared of this women's wave hashtag that they shut it down for us. 1,000 women and survivors and allies have gathered in the Hart Senate building, every hallway, every floor. Please understand the tactic of going inside a building, even a government building, which, by the way, in the Portland riots, they were trying to lob bombs into courthouses. They were taking over police stations. The idea that a mob who is out of control and angry gets inside some federal or state facility is not a great thing. It has happened in America over and over and over. Over this past summer, the violent mobs in this country, in cities all over the country, got inside police stations, took over police stations, occupied a whole area of cities. None of that justified impeaching anybody, because all of that served the interests of the Democrat left, the Marxist movement in this country. All that violence helped the Marxist movement, and therefore all of that violence was tolerated. Nobody talks about doing anything about it. But you have Antifa marchers and some Trump people in the Capitol, and this is yet another ground to impeach Trump. I mean, it is so absurd, so offensive, so obnoxious, so unjustified. And I realize I'm kind of, past wishful thinking on this. I really wish there'd be some Democrats in the House who could find the backbone and the integrity to say, you can't impeach a president over a riot. I mean, he's going to be out of office in 10 days. You're going to impeach him over a riot when we, the Democrats, have instigated, fomented, benefited from, legitimized violence in the streets of America for an entire year. And you have one time that some portion of the rioters were, and I continue to believe it's a small portion of those rioters, got into the Capitol, engaged in violence, And that's basis to impeach. It just makes a mockery of the entire seriousness of what impeachment is supposed to be. It's a political stunt, and I just pray that some Democrat members of Congress will say to Pelosi in private, are you freaking crazy? Are you crazy? This is not an impeachable offense. It's outrageous. And yes, I know Chris Christie said it was impeachable, but that's because he's out of it. He is so jealous of Trump's success, angry that he couldn't make it any further in the Trump administration, couldn't make it any further in his bid for president. So he's making idiotic statements out there. I mean, the world is full of idiotic statements. That's why we have a First Amendment. You're allowed to do them. But this whole thing, to wrap up this segment of the show, I really want to encourage you to recognize how outrageous it is that Nancy Pelosi and her Democrat team of Marxists would be trying to impeach Trump over conduct that he did not engage in himself. He told the marchers, peaceful, we're going to go over there peacefully, and that they, the Democrat Party, have been fomenting violence in America for a year, and somehow, because the one Trump rally finally has apparently some people engaging in violence, and that's enough to impeach the president. I mean, it's so outrageous, it's so bad, it is so offensive, and it makes a mockery of the seriousness of our Constitution, of what the idea of impeachment is. It is unspeakably obnoxious and unjustified. And by the way, one more quick clip to remind you how much Democrats regularly are okay with violence. I want to ask Matt the Wonderful to play. This is the Baltimore mayor. I think it was 2015. Back in the time, they were having riots, destroying properties, smashing cars, burning cars, far more detrimental, far more dangerous than what's happened in the Capitol. And hear what this mayor had to say.
I've made it very clear that I worked with the police and instructed them to do everything that they could to make sure that the protesters were able to exercise their right to free speech. It's a very delicate balancing act, because while we tried to make sure that they were protected from the cars and the other things that were going on, we also gave those who wished to destroy space to do that as well.
Okay, and you recognize, of course, these people who are rioting in Baltimore and riots happening all over the country, they're actually destroying private property, burning police cars. I mean, and the whole, I didn't look it up, but I should for this week. All of the riots we endured in this country, in the major cities in this country, the entire year, I mean, I think it's something like 36 people lost their lives. 36. And numerous police officers. And all of this rioting was fine with Nancy Pelosi. All it was fine with every Democrat in Washington. But let a stolen election come to be, allow it, facilitate it to get through Congress, and the idea that there were some people, and I'm all in favor of prosecuting the ones who committed crimes, whether Antifa or they are Trump supporters or whoever they are. If they committed crimes, you got to prosecute them. But the idea that you would justify impeachment over that is, it just makes her so unserious, so disgusting, deplorable, outrageous, that this is a basis that she would find to say, yeah, let's go ahead and do yet another impeachment. The only reason she's doing it is because she maintained a Democrat majority in the House, and she's hoping that the Senate is going to end up humoring her too. I don't know what will happen there, but this is not a disgrace for Donald Trump. It's a disgrace for Nancy Pelosi.